A Nightmare on Elm Street, Dreamspawn, Chapter 12. Jane, Lola, Amber, and Rose sat in Lola's van, wrapped in a kind of hot, furious hush as they sped along the dark freeway. Jane and Lola wore the black fatigues they had used for the torture video. Amber had put together an all-black outfit that made her look like either a survivalist dominatrix or a member of the Playboy SWAT team. Rose was in her usual subtly unflattering and unfashionable get-up, only this time the ill-fitting work pants and weird scratchy discount bin sweater were both black. They didn't speak. Of course, Brandon had tried to talk to Jane, calling her cell phone over and over, and even coming over to try and see her, but she froze him out, unable to stand even the sound of his voice. Her mother was baffled by her daughter's fury, and Jane refused to explain her actions. Let her mother assume it was some run-of-the-mill teenage drama. It was safer for her. Getting out of the house had been depressingly easy. She had simply told her mother she was spending the night at Lola's again. Her mom did not mention the canceled date with Brandon, just kissed Jane and gave her that same, "I'm here if you need to talk" look. It never ceased to amaze Jane how clueless adults could be. Lola drove and Rose sat shotgun, a map open in her lap. The nearby town of Springwood was about 35 miles to the north, and its downscale industrial neighborhood was ridiculously easy to find, encrusting the edges of the freeway like a cancer. Somehow Jane had imagined that the legendary factory that had once served as a child killer's playground would be out in the middle of nowhere, miles away from anything. Amazingly, it was just off the freeway exit ramp, looming sullenly on a wide, weedy lot next to a Korean toy warehouse. Talk about ironic. Lola parked the wheezing minivan at the dead end of the street, beneath a dirty yellow sign that read "No Outlet." Jane hugged herself as she watched Lola silently pop the hatchback and extract her sleeping bag and the black duffel filled with tools. They had prepared for stealth, but the neighborhood was as utterly deserted as a set from some bad mid-'80s After the Bomb movie. No other cars, no stray cats, no rats, not even a cockroach. On the far side of the factory, cars flew past, unseeing and oblivious on the freeway, their occupants concentrating on getting anywhere but here. The girls could have been in sequined bikinis carrying boom boxes and no one would have noticed. Lola strolled up to the factory gate and used a bulky set of bolt cutters to casually snip the rusted chain. The clatter as the chain fell to the concrete made them all jump, but nothing happened. Lola tossed the cutter back in the duffel and hefted her sleeping bag on her shoulder. "Well," she said, "let's do this." "Right," Rose said, grabbing her own pack from the trunk. Amber and Jane followed suit, and the four girls slipped together through the gate and into the lot. The old brick building had clearly been abandoned for years. A once jaunty sign featuring a happy rabbit in oversized work gloves and goggles proclaimed, "Rauco, leader in..." Whatever Rauco had ever been a leader in had since faded to ineligibility. Beneath that was a dusty yellow banner reading, "Industrial property for sale. Will build to suit." A telephone number was also advertised. It looked like it had been there for ages with no takers. Many of the panes in the huge windows had been smashed, and a few brave kids had hastily tagged the building's dirty brick skin. But there was no other sign of human presence. The place seemed leaden with the horror of what its walls had witnessed. Jane could not believe that less than 3 short blocks from there was the mundane suburban American landscape of strip malls, franchise restaurants, and gas stations. People sat at that very moment, stuffing fries into their faces and worrying about missing the lineup on their favorite network, as unaware of what was happening here as they had been years ago, when the child killer named Freddy Krueger had his way with Springwood's innocent children. But as creepy and morbid as it was to revisit the place where a famous murderer had committed his crimes, Jane still found it next to impossible to believe Rose's claim that Freddy Krueger had achieved some kind of immortality in the nebulous realms of dreams, that he could be resurrected and used against their enemies. It was the stuff of one of Lola's beloved horror movies, a hasty excuse of a plot to allow for maximum on-screen blood and gore. Jane only hoped that somehow this pilgrimage would help Rose to deal with her anger and shame and allow her to move on. Jane herself had no idea if she would ever get over the pain of trusting Brandon, and having that trust so brutally betrayed. Yet, in a horrible way, that betrayal made an awful kind of sense to Jane. The idea that Brandon was a worthless, lying son of a bitch, just like all the other boys, made far more sense than the unrealistic fantasy that he was really different and special. She never should have allowed herself to buy into that foolish pop song sappy dream of puppy love. What the hell had she been thinking? She clearly wasn't, which was the reason she had fallen for his deceitful charm. She let her body override her mind, something that she would never let happen again. Jane ached with bitter fury for allowing herself to be duped by a jock. They found several huge loading bays with giant roll-up metal doors so corroded they looked as if they would never open again, but it took some doing to locate a human-sized entrance. When they found it, they didn't even need the bolt cutters. The chain that had once bound the doors together had rusted away and now dangled uselessly as Christmas tinsel. For a long minute they all just stood there, wordless and unsure. Then Rose reached out, yanked off the remains of the chain, and pulled the door open, clicking on her flashlight. The oppressive, dusty emptiness of the abandoned factory dwarfed the feeble beams of their flashlights as they entered and stood huddled together in the doorway. To their left was a rickety little stairway that led up to a door in an odd square room that stuck out like an isolated box high up near the ceiling. The main space of the factory floor was jammed with unfathomable dead machines, their original purpose impossible to guess. The spaces between them were laced with rusted and unsafe-looking catwalks. On the wall beside the stairway was that same cheerful goggled bunny from the sign outside, flashing a buck-toothed grin and giving the thumbs up. Beneath him in orange block letters, "Rally the Rabbit says, safety first." "Which way?" Lola asked. Rose shone the beam of her flashlight across the faces of the dead machines. "We need to find the basement," she said. "The boiler room." The thought of descending into the lightless basement of this grim and hostile old building filled Jane with jagged apprehension. She was beginning to wonder if this was such a good idea. Fantasy dream demons aside, who knew what kind of crackheads or homeless weirdos might be lurking in the bowels of this miserable, forsaken place? But in spite of herself, she swallowed her misgivings and followed Rose. They walked, single file, Rose in the lead, followed closely by Jane and Amber, with Lola bringing up the rear. They stayed in a tight little pack, creeping along inside the protective halo formed by their pathetic, yellow circle of light. They passed huge vats, broken hand trucks, and empty crates, but found no way down. Following the walls, they covered the perimeter and then started working their way between the machines. It was terribly easy to get turned around in the dim, shadowy factory, and they were always uncomfortably sure that they were going in circles. "We should have brought breadcrumbs," Jane said. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Lola asked. Rose shot Lola a hostile look and kept on, turning a corner between two massive machines. The girls grew bitchy and snappish as they circled and circled, finding nothing. Only Rose remained firm, grim, and determined as the leader of an Arctic expedition that might not make it back. "Look," Amber said, "this is bullshit." "Rose, there's nothing here," Jane said. Rose drew up suddenly short, initiating a comedic collision as the girls stumbled into each other. "What now?" Lola asked, irritated. The beam from Rose's light had pinned something on the floor, something gray and dusty, like a little animal corpse. Jane squinted at the object and slowly realized what it was. An ancient leatherwork glove, flattened and rotten, fingers crumpled. "You're kidding, right?" Lola came forward and nudged the stiff glove with the tip of her toe. "That's the glove?" Rose shook her head and made a contemptuous noise of dismissal. "No, stupid," she said. "Look!" Rose squatted down and blew on the floor. A cloud of dust billowed up, revealing a long, dark crack. Rose followed the crack with her fingers as it made a right-angled turn, and then another, tracing a square nearly 6 feet across, a trap door. She pushed the old glove out of the way. Beneath it was a smooth metal ring, folded down flush with the floor. "Shit," Lola said softly. Laying her pack on the floor, Rose pried up the big ring and yanked on it. She was able to lift the trap about an inch upward before it slipped out of her grip and slammed, sending a huge swirling vortex of dust. Jane sneezed twice in quick succession, and Amber waved her hands in front of her face to clear away the cloud. "Come on," Rose said, grabbing the ring again. "Help me!" She lifted again, grunting between clenched teeth, and Lola knelt down and wedged her hands in the crack, gripping the edge of the trap door. Amber looked at Jane and then crouched beside Lola and grabbed hold of the trap door. Jane watched as the three of them muscled the trap up until it was perpendicular to the floor and then dropped it. It crashed to the ground with a huge, hollow boom that echoed like cannon fire through the factory. Jane shone her light down into the black and gaping throat revealed beneath the trap door. A tomb-like stench of mold, age, and crumbling brick wafted out of the hole. There were no stairs, just a rickety metal ladder leading straight down. The happy rabbit had been painted on the wall beside the ladder's top rung, reminding them to put safety first. Some long-gone joker had made a few editorial changes. The rabbit was holding a crudely drawn pitchfork and sporting horns between his ears. His message of safety had been crossed out, and instead it read, "Rally the Rabbit says, abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Jane shuddered, skin coursing with involuntary chills. Without hesitation, Rose slid her legs down on the rungs of the ladder and started descending. They watched the joggling beam from her light scribble through the blackness as she went, until she reached the distant bottom. She seemed so small as she shone the light up onto her face and called up, "Toss down the packs." The three girls exchanged looks, and then Lola shrugged and tossed down Rose's pack, followed with her own. Jane and Amber did the same, and then Lola started down the ladder. Amber frowned, clenching her fists, and climbed down after Lola. Standing alone in that dark factory, Jane felt 1 inch high, a tiny and insignificant borrower in this vast and sinister place. She wished she could call the girls back up, laugh it off, and go back to Lola's. Anything but descend into the cold black hole before her. Steeling herself, she thought of Brandon and how he had betrayed her. The hurt gave her strength to climb down and join her friends in that creepy, lightless basement. When she set her foot on the damp concrete at the bottom of the ladder, she felt an icy chill seep into her bones. They were at the dead end of a long corridor that led to a wide archway, and through there, presumably, the boiler room. Puddles of black, slimy water fouled the concrete as they walked, engulfed by the stench of cold rot and secrets. Jane could not even conceive of the terror a small child would have felt, being carried down into this hellish lair. Did he kill them right away, or did he torture them first? The machines would have been alive then, the huge boiler hissing like a dragon. Their cacophony would have easily covered the agonized shrieks of a dying child. Rose's light found something pale and dirty against the left-hand wall. She nudged it with her toe, and it rolled, revealing itself to be a naked, headless baby doll, stiff plastic limbs twisted into an unnatural position. The girls exchanged a silent look and continued on, through the archway and into the massive cathedral-like space of the cold and disused boiler room. There was a rickety work table and a single metal stool off to one side. Rotted coils of rope lay beneath a trio of heavy iron hooks, set a little over 4 feet up the brick wall, just about the height of a child's hands, if they were standing on tiptoe and reaching up as high as they could. There were dark stains on the brick and on the cement floor below, forming concentric rings where blood had flowed and dried. Dominating the center of the room was the boiler itself, crouched like a heathen idol, like a giant mechanical spider beneath a twisting maze of ducts. Its rough metal hide was mottled with rust, and the large square hatch was partially ajar, revealing a thin slice of even blacker darkness. Rose nearly ran to the boiler, and Jane had to bite her tongue not to yell out for her to stay back. Something about that massive boiler struck Jane as particularly sinister. Rose knelt down before it like a supplicant, thrusting her hand into its black and gaping maw. When she turned to her friend, she was holding a dirty gray bundle. "Is that it?" Lola whispered. Rose unwrapped the filthy cloth to reveal its contents. It was a blade-tipped glove, just like Rose had described. And Jane realized with a kind of greasy, helpless dread that she had actually dreamed that glove. She had seen it, only she couldn't quite remember where. As Rose turned the glove over in her hands, it seemed to warp and shimmer, as if its physical boundaries were somehow not quite solid. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Rose's green eyes glowed with the burning fanaticism of a religious zealot. She reverently lifted the glove from its cloth shroud, and holding the base of the index finger blade, she sliced deeply into the scarred flesh of her wrist. Her fresh red blood ran down the length of the blade, soaking into the stiff brown leather. "Now you," she said, handing the glove to Lola. "You sure about this?" Lola asked, holding the glove and frowning at Rose. "Just do it," Rose said. "Use the middle finger." Lola shrugged, forcing out a laugh. "How appropriate," she said, raising the middle blade of the glove as if it were giving them the bird. "Fuck you, rapist jock fuckheads!" She winced as she drew the blade across her arm, blood flowing and saturating the glove. She shook her hand and clenched it into a fist, then passed the glove to Amber. "I don't know," Amber said. "It doesn't look very clean." "Don't wimp out on us now, prom queen," Lola said. Amber bit her lip and defiantly sliced into her wrist with the ring finger blade. "Ow, shit, that hurts," she said as her blood dripped down onto the glove. "Your turn, Jane." Jane reluctantly took the glove, holding it as if it were contaminated. It no longer shimmered, and its edges seemed crisper, more defined. This was ridiculous, stupid Ouija board antics unworthy of a girl of her age and intelligence. Yet she felt a creeping sense of unease, looking around at the flashlight-lit faces of her friends and down at this horribly familiar object. She could put a stop to this right now. She could put her foot down and refuse to participate in this childish charade. But she was far more afraid of appearing uncool in front of her friends. So she quickly scratched the tip of the pinky blade across her wrist. No blood appeared in the red scratch, and she had to go over it again, gritting her teeth against the bright pain. Jane had never in her life hurt herself on purpose. The only time she had ever been cut was when she'd accidentally sliced her thumb once while chopping tomatoes for spaghetti sauce nearly 9 years ago. She hadn't even needed stitches, just a kiss from her dad and a Band-Aid. That little cut did not prepare her for the burning pain that engulfed her wrist, radiating out from the awkward slice as her blood oozed from her palm, dribbling down onto the glove. A hollow, dizzy chill skittered through her, and the next thing she knew, Lola was leaning over her, repeating her name as if shouting down an echoing well. "Jane? Jane? Jane, are you okay?" Jane shook her head. "I'm fine." She realized she was slumped on the floor, back against the hulking boiler. "You fainted," Rose said. "Great," Jane said, pressing her hand to her forehead. Her face was slick with cold sweat. "How embarrassing." "Don't worry about it," Rose said, turning her back and cradling the glove like it was a wounded bird. Lola helped Jane lay down her bedroll as Rose made a large, uneven circle around them with her blood on the dirty concrete floor. The other girls arranged their bedding, too, and Amber pulled out a sleek portable alarm clock. 20 minutes, right? Rose joined them and nodded, laying out her own bedroll. "Jane, do you have the pills?" she asked. Jane nodded and fished in her pocket, extracting a Ziploc baggie containing 4 white pills. Her mother had these sleeping pills left over from the hellish weeks after her father's death, and while she still popped one on occasion, Jane doubted that these 4 would be missed. "Ready?" Jane asked. "Ready," Lola replied. "Ready," Amber said. "Right," Rose said, taking one of the pills and popping it into her mouth. Lola pulled out a bottle of water and passed it around as each girl in turn swallowed a sleeping pill and lay down, tense and silent. Their bedrolls were laid out like compass points, their heads together in the center. Jane closed her eyes, wondering yet again if this was such a good idea. But after all, it was just a dream. How could a dream possibly hurt anyone? Chapter 13. The needling electronic sound of the little alarm clock dug its nails into Jane's consciousness, and she sat up, groggy and confused. It took several slow seconds of sludgy cognition to remember where she was and why she felt so stiff, uncomfortable, and cold. "Shit," Lola said, pulling her sleeping bag up around her head. "I feel like one of the Marines at the beginning of Aliens, man." "What happened?" Amber asked, reaching out to check the alarm clock. "I don't remember dreaming at all." "Me either," Jane replied. Rose sat silent and sullen, arms tightly wrapped around her body. "Maybe the pills stopped us from dreaming?" Jane ventured quietly, putting her glasses back on her face. "Maybe," Lola said. "Well," Amber said, "we gave it our best shot, Rose, but I guess it didn't work. Can we get the hell out of here now?" "Yeah, sorry, Rose," Jane said, reaching out to touch Rose's hunched shoulder. Rose shrugged her off. "Fuck," she said. "I don't understand." Lola shrugged. "I don't know what to tell you, man," she said. "I will tell you this, though. I'm with Amber. Let's get the fuck out of this hole." "Come on," Jane said softly, standing and offering her hand to Rose. Rose scowled at Jane and then relented and took her off her hand. The girls quietly packed their things and slung their bags over their shoulders. Rose wrapped the bladed glove in its ratty shroud and stuffed it into her pack. She paused in the doorway, shining her flashlight around the cold, dark boiler room for the last time. "I was so sure," she said. "I'm sorry," Jane said. "Yeah, me too," Lola said. "Looks like we're just going to have to kick those fuckers' asses ourselves." The girls trooped down the stone corridor towards the ladder. The headless doll still lay there, silent and forgotten, just as so much that took place within these walls had been forgotten. Eager Amber took the lead, first to mount the ladder, and she was more than halfway up when a harsh and ominous squeal shattered the silence. "Shh," Amber said, gripping the rungs of the ladder as the ancient bolts holding it in place began to peel free of the brick. "Hang on, Amber," Lola shouted. Amber pressed on, continuing to climb the shuddering, rickety ladder as it shimmied loose and began to slip alarmingly to one side. "Shit!" Amber said again. "Shit, shit, shit!" Her flashlight slipped from her grip and tumbled to the floor below, shattering at Jane's feet. Amber had one hand over the edge when the ladder fell, crashing to the cement below and smashing into several jagged pieces. Amber was left dangling 20 feet above them, hanging desperately onto the edge of the trap door. Jane covered her mouth in anxious terror as Amber struggled to pull herself up enough to look and hook her chin over the edge. There would be no second chance. If she fell the 20 feet to the concrete floor, she would be fatally injured or killed, and they would all be trapped in the cellar of an abandoned building with no hope of rescue. No one knew where they were, and no one had any reason to enter the empty factory and discover them by accident. They had only the one bottle of water and no food. Even if they were careful, the batteries in their flashlight would slowly die within the first 48 hours, and they would be left to starve to death in total darkness, less than 3 blocks from Taco Bell. Jane's vivid imagination painted horrific images of desperation, blind cannibalism, and slow, creeping madness as Amber slipped, caught herself, and then struggled to pull herself up again. "Come on, Amber," Jane whispered, staring fixedly at the pale bottoms of Amber's brand-new boots as they kicked and flailed through the air above their heads. "Come on, come on, come on." Amber was finally able to throw her entire upper body across the factory floor. She lay there resting for nearly a minute and then slowly pulled her dangling legs up after her. The girls below cheered in a massive wave of relief. Another long stretch of seconds ticked by before Amber's blonde head appeared, looking down over the edge of the big square hole. "I'm okay," she called. "Thank God," Jane said. "Now what?" Amber asked. Lola and Rose looked at each other, shrugging. "She should go get help," Jane said. "No," Rose said adamantly. "Why not?" Jane asked her. "We could get in big trouble for being in here, you know," Lola said. "Trespassing, breaking and entering." "Damn it," Jane said. "Can you call someone to come here and help us? Randall, maybe? He'd be up, right?" Lola pulled her phone from her bag and flipped it open. "No signal," she said. "How about you?" Jane searched through her pack for her little phone. Nothing. No signal. She shook her head. "Amber?" Lola called. Phone's in my pack, Amber replied. Lola hunted up Amber's phone. Unsurprisingly, it too had no signal. Rose? Rose shook her head. I don't even have a phone, she said. Great! Lola shook her head. Amber could drive to a payphone, Jane suggested. Lola pulled the keys to the van from her pocket and stood beneath the trap. She threw the keys up towards Amber. They fell short, clattering back down. She tried again, and each time they fell short of Amber's reaching fingers. Look, Rose said. I don't see how calling some boy is going to help us anyway. He could bring us rope, Lola said, trying again to toss the keys up to Amber and failing once again. Rope? Jane said, frowning. Wait a minute. Rose, come with me. Without thinking twice, she turned and headed back to the boiler room. Rose followed obediently behind, trotting to keep up with Jane's urgent steps. There, beneath those 3 iron hooks, just where Jane remembered them, were several old lengths of rope. Do you think it'll be enough? Rose asked. It better be, Jane replied, trying not to look too closely at the stiff brown stains on the ancient rope as she gathered the pieces in her arms. Come on, Rose, help me. Together, Rose and Jane collected every piece of rope they could find, all towed about 8 pieces varying in length from 3 to 4 feet. They brought the rope back to where Lola was waiting beneath the trap door. Brilliant, Lola said, as Jane dumped the rope at her feet. Let's hope it's enough, guys. She started knotting the pieces together into one long strand. Jane watched apprehensively as Lola carefully coiled it up and threw it with all her might up towards Amber. It did not go even halfway up before fluttering back down like a limp party streamer. Fuck, Lola said. It's too light. Why don't you tie something to the end? Rose suggested. Right, Lola said. She fished in her tool bag for a large pair of pliers. She knotted the rope around the joints of the pliers and started swinging it over her head like a demented cowboy, building up momentum. Here it comes, she cried as she let the rope go. The pliers flew straight up, thwacking against the edge of the trap. Amber scrambled and caught them. I got 'em, Amber called. Yes, Lola hissed. All right, Jane said. Okay, I'm going to find something sturdy to tie it to, Amber said. It's pretty dark up here with no light, so this may take a minute. The 3 girls waited in anxious silence, training their lights up at the trap while Amber fumbled and shuffled around in the dark above their heads. A shower of thin dust filtered down, and then the rope tumbled over the edge. The frayed end swung about 4 feet above the cement floor. Amber's head reappeared in the square trap. Okay, Lola replied. Packs first. They tied the packs to the end of the rope one by one, and Amber hauled them up and over the edge. As Rose's pack was lifted, her little black zippered case slipped out and fell to the ground. Jane bent to retrieve it and hand it to Rose when a shiny antique scalpel tumbled out from the unzipped end. Thanks, Rose said quickly, picking up the scalpel and reaching to take the case from Jane's hand. Jane's eye was drawn to the faded old scars on Rose's wrist beside the bright new one made by the blade of Freddy's glove. She remembered Rose disappearing into the bathroom with that little black case and returning with dots of blood soaking through her sleeves. Uneasy and unsure of what to say, Jane let Rose take the case. Rose stuck it in her pocket and went to work tying Jane's pack to the rope, like it was no big deal. When all the packs were up, Amber dropped the rope back down and Rose gripped the end, looking doubtfully back at Lola and Jane. You can do it, Lola said. Rose bit her lip and started to climb. As Jane watched her tentative and shaky progress, she wondered if she was going to be able to make it herself. She was struck with a sudden, shameful memory of a time when she had been forced to climb a thick, splintery rope in gym class. The entire class stood gathered around the bottom of the rope, laughing and jeering as she clung for dear life about a third of the way up, unable to go further, but terrified of falling. There was no cushy navy blue mat at the bottom of this rope either, just unforgiving cement. Jane realized she was holding her breath as Rose neared the top. She let that breath out in a relieved rush as Amber caught Rose by her arm and helped her up and over the edge. Now 2 small heads peeped over the side. Rose grinned and gave the okay sign with her fingers. You next, Lola said, nodding towards the swinging rope. I don't know, Jane said, eyeing the end of the rope where it dangled just below the level of her chin. There's nothing to know, Lola said. Just climb, girl. Jane reached out and grabbed onto the rope a few feet from the end. She experimentally lifted her feet up off the ground and scooched herself upward. Her arms felt as if they were going to pull free from their sockets as she pulled her weight up a wobbly inch at a time, until she was able to grab the rope between her thighs. She hung there, terrified, squeezing the rope with her legs. She was not even a quarter of the way up, and she already felt her grip slipping. A fearful grunt slipped out between her teeth, and the rope slid between her hands, burning her palms as she fell, landing hard on her ass. Damn it, she said, struggling to her feet. You okay? Lola asked, rushing to her help. Fine, Jane said, face hot with embarrassment. Determined not to seem pathetic in front of her friend, she sucked in a deep breath and leapt up, grabbing the rope again. Her arms burned and her shoulders ached as she fought to pull herself up. She could not make it and dropped hopelessly back down again. Okay, listen, Lola said. Here's what we're going to do. She started unbuttoning her shirt. What are you doing? Jane asked Lola as she pulled her shirt off and stood braless and goosebumped in the chilly basement. Are you crazy? Trust me, Lola said, knotting the long sleeves of her shirt together and tying the end of the rope around the knot. When she stepped back, there was kind of a sling dangling from the end of the rope. What you're going to do, Jane, Lola said, seeming not to care at all that she was topless in front of everyone, is get one foot into that loop and hang on. Then Amber and Rose are going to pull you up. Jane looked doubtfully at the knotted shirt. Are you sure? She asked. No, Lola said, grinning, but we got to try something. Okay, then, Jane replied, smiling a little in return, and leapt up to grab the rope once again. After much struggling, Jane was able to get her foot into the loop of Lola's shirt. She squeezed her eyes shut and hung on tight. Okay, she shouted. I'm ready. Amber and Rose started hauling her slowly upward. Jane kept her eyes tightly shut, not wanting to see the floor falling away as she rose higher and higher. Then, miraculously, she felt hands gripping her, and she was yanked up over the edge and pulled into a fierce double embrace. You made it, Rose said. God damn, Amber whispered. She let herself be hugged for a few more seconds until Lola's voice called out from down below. All right, forget the lovey-dovey shit, and toss that fucking rope back down already. I'm freezing. Jane laughed and untangled herself from the rope, lowering it back down over the edge. Lola untied her shirt and put it back on, before clambering up the rope like a monkey, pulling herself up in record time. All right, Lola said, let's get the fuck out of here. They shone their flashlights around the silent, hulking machines that surrounded them. Which way? Jane asked. Rose? Amber said. Rose looked around, frowning. This way, I think. She indicated the direction with her chin. Should we close the trap door? Amber asked, gazing down into the hole. I guess, Lola said. She gripped the edge of it. Give me a hand. Together they lifted the heavy door and let it slam down, closing over the black pit and its dark and bloody memories. They followed Rose's lead for almost 10 minutes, taking what seemed like a slightly diagonal but relatively direct route towards the door. They pressed on, passing mysterious machine after mysterious machine, but somehow the path they took just kept on going. Their lights could not touch the outer wall of the factory. There were just rows and rows of machines as far as the eye could see. Are you sure we're going the right way? Amber asked. Sure, I'm sure, Rose replied. Another long brace of silent minutes passed, uneventfully. Jane's feet were really starting to hurt. How can we keep walking like this? Lola said. We should have hit the wall of the building by now. How big is this place? Amber asked. We must be going in circles, Jane said. We are not, Rose snapped. Well then, what the fuck? Lola asked. They trooped along in angry silence for several more minutes, and then Lola stopped short, hands on hips. Look, she said, this is ridiculous. We've been walking for 15 minutes and pretty close to a straight line, but we still haven't hit the wall. If an average person walks 4 miles an hour, there's no way this building is a mile wide, Jane said, incredulous. We just... Rose wiped the back of her hand across her mouth. We just got turned around somehow. Jane could see that Rose was close to tears. Turned around? Lola scoffed. We're fucked is what we are. Like I knew this was a bad idea, Amber said. A big fucking waste of time, Lola spat. We're gonna be here when the fucking sun comes up. If the sun comes up, Amber said. Fuck you, Rose said, tears spilling over the rims of her willow green eyes. Hey, Jane said, enough. We're tired and cranky, and we all just want to be home. But there's no reason to start sniping at each other. Sorry, Lola said, closing her eyes and running her hands through her purple hair. Look, Amber said, there's the wall. At the farthest beam of her flashlight rose a comfortingly solid wall of brick. See, Rose said, now all we have to do is follow the wall until we find the door. Oh, ye of little faith, Jane said, laughing. When they reached the wall, they found something profoundly disquieting. The featureless brick was unbroken for as far as the flashlight beam could reach to both the left and right, and more disturbingly, up. Where are the windows? Amber asked. I have a really bad feeling about this, Lola said. It can't be, Jane whispered. It's just not possible. Jane felt chilled and anxious, but Rose was beaming like a bride, ecstatic. Don't you see? She enthused, eyes glittering in the meager light. It isn't possible, because it isn't real. We're dreaming now. Lola frowned. Are you sure? She looked up at the vast, unending wall. Everything feels pretty real. Amber reached over and pinched Lola. Ow, bitch! Lola cried. Like too real, Amber said. This is a dream? Jane asked incredulously. Rose nodded. We have to find Freddy's remains, she said. Remains? Not his real bones and stuff, Rose said. They were destroyed years ago. We need to find his dream remains. They seed from which he can be reborn. Jane felt any traces of confidence melting away. She found that she wanted nothing more than to wake up in her own safe, comfortable bed. She'd had it with this foolishness, and was more sure now than ever that this was a terrible idea. Her only comfort was the fact that it was just a dream. She'd had plenty of nightmares before, many far worse than this one, and as upsetting as they were, nothing ever came of them in the real world. Well, Lola said, where are the remains? Do we just keep wandering endlessly around this place, hoping to stumble across them at random? Rose shook her head. We need to find a door, she said. A door from this collective dream consciousness and into Freddy's dream. Into Freddy's dream? Jane frowned. Whenever he is banished from the real world, he retreats into his own nightmare, a kind of psychic reliquary where his dark essence is trapped until it can be unleashed again. Jane did not like the sound of that one bit. If you say so, girl, Lola said, shining her flashlight across the faces of the machines. So where is this stupid door? Is that it? Amber asked quietly. They all turned to look where she was pointing. There was a tiny child-sized door set into the rusty flank of a massive steel vat, about 15 feet down the wall from where they stood. The little door was made of cheerful red wood, like something out of a fairy tale of happy gnomes and elves. The girls approached it silently, and Rose reached out to turn the cut glass knob. She pulled the door open and squatted down to look inside. Come on, she said, and stepped through the door. Lola looked back at Amber and Jane and shrugged, then followed Rose. Amber was next, and once again Jane stood alone in the cold, dark factory, or its corresponding double inside this unknowable, impossible dream realm. She quickly crawled through the little door to join her friends. On the other side, she found herself standing on a sleepy suburban street. Bland, middle-class houses with well-kept lawns and cheerful flower beds. The cars parked in driveways and along the street were nice and looked quite new. But all were nearly 20 years old. In front of them was a house not unlike its neighbors, simple, average, and unassuming. The only remarkable thing about it, The thing that made it stand out in this nice, sleepy neighborhood was the thick, no-nonsense security bars on every window, including the little rectangular window in the center of the door. "Nancy's house," Rose whispered reverently. "Where the hell are we?" Lola asked. Rose turned to her, eyes burning. "We're on Elm Street," she said. Together the girls walked up the neat little path to the door of the house. It was not locked. Inside, it was a completely ordinary suburban house. Clean carpets, family portraits, comfortable lived-in furniture. Nothing sinister at all, and yet there was an almost suffocating pall of fear hanging over every room. It made the hairs on the back of Jane's neck prickle as she followed Rose down a long, dim hallway to a white cellar door, standing slightly ajar. Rose did not hesitate to push the door wide and start down the stairs. Jane felt as if she had been following Rose forever, as if she had forgotten how to do anything else. As they headed down the stairs, things started to change in a way that was difficult for Jane to put her finger on. The walls seemed deceitful, shimmering and shifting while she wasn't looking. The air itself seemed thick with something that was not quite a sound and not quite a feeling, but something in between, like the crackle of electricity or a noise too deep for human ears. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves not in a suburban basement, but in a very long, very thin corridor. The walls were riddled with holes, some dime-sized, some as big as dinner plates. As they walked, Jane's eyes was caught by flickering light, flashing in the depths of the head-high holes, and she could not resist leaning in to look. As if peering through a fish-eye peephole in an apartment door, Jane was treated to a view of a dark and unpretentious chapel. A slender nun knelt before the altar, praying out loud in an intense and urgent whisper. There was a naked baby boy laying unattended on the stone floor several feet away, crying weakly, stubby legs kicking. The next hole revealed what looked like some kind of institutional dormitory, filled with row upon row of bunk beds. A thin, geeky blond boy with a spreading red stain on the seat of his light blue pants stood in the middle of a hostile, mocking crowd of identically dressed boys. "Period, period, Freddy got a period," the boys chanted, pointing and laughing at the blond boy. Jane's heart went out to the little boy in his abject shame and humiliation. He was clearly the victim of some horrific abuse. Where were the adults? Why didn't they do something? Then it occurred to Jane that the adults in question might be responsible for the boy's condition, and she felt a profound stab of empathy that was almost physical in its intensity. This geeky little boy was just like them, like Lola, locked in the art supply closet, like Amber, held down and drenched with gin, like Rose, scribbled on with a Sharpie and then much worse, like Jane, time and time again made to feel ugly, unworthy and small, like all of them treated as if they were less than human, simply because they did not fit in, picked on by peers and ignored, or worse, by adults. The poor little boy was trapped in this moment of endless bullying, like some inescapable psychic cul-de-sac. Jane ached to smash the faces of the thoughtless bullies, and pull the little boy close, to promise to him that he was not alone, that there were others who felt his pain, to save him and to stop what Jane feared would be unavoidable, the slippery downward spiral into madness, torture, and death. Jane reluctantly tore herself away from that vision. She did not want to look into the next hole, but the temptation was impossible to resist. Inside, she saw the boy again, a little older and in a different color uniform, but still just as geeky and awkward. His face was now ablaze with radioactive-looking acne, and he was crouched against the wall in a cracked concrete yard, clutching something small, furry, and gray in one fist. In the other hand, he held a stubby yellow pencil that he was stabbing repeatedly into the gray furry thing. "Period, period, period," he hissed, blood dripping from his knuckles. Jane was appalled and horrified. It was like watching the build-up to a massive 12-car pileup on the freeway. The guy talking on his cell phone, the mom scolding her kids, the drunk, the girl putting on mascara, everything and everyone oblivious but Jane, and knowing that she could do nothing to stop it. Why didn't anyone help him? Didn't anybody care? It was like letting a child waste away from the flu when a warm bed, some orange juice, and the knowledge that someone cared if he got better or not would have made a world of difference. The next hole showed an entirely more grown-up scene. A sleazy motel room, with the cheap polyester coverlet thrown back off the bed. There were several crumpled bills scattered across the nightstand. A hard-faced, red-haired woman lay topless on the bed, her arms crossed over her sagging breasts. On the other side of the bed, a scrawny blond kid barely into his 20s sat naked, with his head in his hands. "It's okay, honey," the woman said, lighting up a cigarette. "Happens all the time." Inside the following hole was a dingy, one-room apartment. The walls were covered with cut-out pictures from magazines, plastered from floor to ceiling, even pasted over the single window. Every picture seemed to be a smiling child. Catalog photos and advertisements and the sappy printed display photos that come inside picture frames when you buy them. Thousands upon thousands of pretty, happy children. Every single one had the eyes furiously scribbled out with red ink. There was no furniture, only a crummy card table and a single metal folding chair. In the chair, facing away from Jane, was a man. He had dirty blonde hair and a red and green striped sweater, and he sat hunched over the table, banging his fist repeatedly against his temple. "No, no, 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 no," he said over and over again. The next one was sickeningly familiar to Jane. 3 perfect little blonde girls skipping rope in perfect white party dresses. They were not singing the counting song from Jane's dream. They were singing a simple song about strawberry shortcake and the letters of the alphabet. The man in the striped sweater stood by a nearby jungle gym, his back to Jane, watching them. The skipping girl stumbled, laughing and missing her step. Then she looked over towards the man in the striped sweater and drew her blonde eyebrows together, frowning and pursing her lips. She left her friends and walked over to where the man stood. "What?" she said. The scene inside the next hole made Jane pull back in horror. A scream clenched back between her teeth. It was too dark to make much out, but she could see tiny, slender white arms slick with blood and twitching spastically, bound with the child's jump rope, and there were other things far too terrible for Jane to even think about. So many more. Jane's mind reeled at the thought of it. She did not want to look any more, but she found it impossible not to. She saw the man in the striped sweater sharpening the blades of the glove against a smooth stone, lips twisted into silent fury. She saw a bloody dress found in a trash bin by a soft-spoken detective. She saw a courtroom, furious parents sobbing and spitting and cursing, restrained by police. She saw a man burning, dancing like a flaming angel through the night, as sizzling bits of flesh dropped off in his wake. From there, the visions became stranger, dreamlike, and disjointed. She saw tarry swirls of blackness and searing light. She saw a pretty brunette teenager asleep in a bathtub filled with blood. She saw jagged, twitching images that smashed into each other with a mad, nonsensical glee. Eyes, knives, teeth, marionette puppets. A waterbed filled with blood shooting to the ceiling. Glossy, dark organs and blood-clotted hair. Mostly she saw killing. So much killing. Body after body after body slashed open and butchered until the gender, the individuality, and even the humanity of the victims were erased, rending them as cold and meaningless as the slabs of plastic-wrapped meat in the supermarket cooler. "Jane," Lola whispered, "come on." Jane shook her head to clear away the horrific visions. There were hundreds of more holes along the length of the hallway. What other unspeakable nightmares lurked inside them? What vile fantasies and evil desires? The dark and terrifying secrets of a killer's black and undying psyche. It was more than Jane could bear. Rose had reached the end of the hallway and was pushing open the single glossy black door. Jane wanted to call out to Rose to stop, but her voice had deserted her. How could they even be considering unleashing something as horrible as the source of those awful visions? When Rose turned back to face Jane and the others, her cheek was bleeding, old scars suddenly fresh and oozing crimson. "Hurry," she said. The room at the end of the hall was small and empty. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all the same, shiny black texture, like obsidian or vinyl. In the center of the floor was a black plastic garbage bag. Rose was kneeling before the bag and tearing into it with her green sparkle nails. The contents spilled out across the floor. Powdery pale gray ash, peppered with a few cracked and broken lumps of bone. Rose's cheek was bleeding heavily, and so was her wrist where she had sliced herself with Freddy's glove. Drops of her blood fell into the ash, and the ash quivered oddly, like iron shavings stirred by a magnet. Jane felt something wet on her arm, and when she looked down, she saw that she too was bleeding again from the self-inflicted cut. Lola and Amber as well, but their blood was not dripping downward. It flowed away from them, twisting through the air in gory streams, towards the twitching ash heap. An oily red curve like a large bubble appeared in the center of the pile, growing larger and larger until Jane realized that it was the crown of a skull. The ashes swirled like dust devils as a skeletal face appeared, followed by the vertebrae of a neck. The bloody ash wove itself together to form long bones, and the delicate curve of a rib cage. Behind that bony cage, a knot of blood coagulated into a pulsating lump of slippery meat, a slowly beating heart. Jane watched, paralyzed with terror, as thick blue veins grew through the newly formed ropey muscles like strangled vines. Skin began to slither over the limbs and torso, thick, rippling scar tissue rolling like water across the surface of the muscles until finally a fully formed man stood before them, yellowy eyes wide open and a mouth a silent scream. He was naked for an awful instant, then the coiling weave of clothing wound around him. Brown pants, a dirty red and green striped sweater, and finally a crumpled fedora hat. The soles of his greasy boots touched down amid the shredded plastic of the garbage bag, and Freddy Krueger stood before them, head cocked suspiciously as he eyed the girls surrounding him. "Who are you?" he asked, "and why are you here?" "Freddy," Rose called, clutching the dirty bundle that held the bladed glove. "Don't you recognize little old me?" He frowned, eyes narrow. Little Rose," he said, leering at her, a smile curling in the corner of his narrow lips. "My, how you've grown." He lunged towards Rose, and Jane let out a tiny, airless gasp. Rose did not flinch. Instead, she pulled the glove from the bundle and held it out towards him. "Stop," she said. "Wait." He took a step back, suspicious and unsure. "We have your glove," Rose said, "the nexus of your power. We brought you back, and now we have a job for you." "A job?" he smirked. "What makes you think I would do a job for you?" "Because you want this." She held up the glove, and his eyes fixed anxiously on the glinting blades. "Tell me," he said. She pulled a crumpled dress from her bag, the one she was wearing the night of the gang raid. "We want you to kill 6 boys," Rose said, tossing the dress to the ground at his feet. "Connor Hall, Kevin Park, David Worthy, David Carslip, Richard Tremont, and Brandon Ortiz." The sound of Brandon's name cut into Jane like a rusty saw. Her hurt and anger was still fresh inside her, and she wanted Brandon to suffer for that hurt. But did she really want him dead? But it was just a dream, right? A scary, awful dream. But still just a dream. She watched, unable to breathe, as Freddy crouched down and clutched the dress in his fist. He brought it to his face, inhaling deeply. "Yeah," he said. "So say I do your dirty work for you. Then what?" "Then the glove is yours," Rose said. "Are you crazy?" Lola asked. "Shh," Amber whispered. Freddy looked around, locking eyes with each of the girls. "You girls are playing a very dangerous game," he said. "You may have the upper hand right now, but I promise you," he took a step closer to Rose, "I'll be paying each of you a special little visit. You won't get away with this." There was a strange, nearly subliminal sound irritating Jane, distracting her like a mosquito, or a leaf blower down the block. It grew louder and louder until it was nearly deafening, the keening electric voice of the alarm clock. To Jane's surprise and horror, Rose drove at Freddy, throwing her arms around him like a crazed fan at a rock concert. Jane tried to call out to her, but no sound would come. She clenched her fist as an awful gush of vertigo filled her, and then she was kicking and struggling against the confines of her bedroll. She scrambled free, sock feet ice cold against the damp cement of the boiler room floor. She grabbed her flashlight and clicked it on. Yellow circle of light skating over the slowly waking forms of her friends. "Holy shit," Lola said, sitting up and running her fingers through her purple hair. "Like, was that real?" Amber asked, eyes wide in the dim light. "Yes," Rose said, rolling over and sitting up. Clutched tightly in her arms was a ratty red and green sweater. "Oh my God," Jane whispered, as the fabric of the sweater began to thin and disintegrate, coiling off into the air like smoke. "What have we done?" Okay, this has been chapters 12 and 13 of A Nightmare on Elm Street Dreamspawn. And I have to say this book is really getting good. We had 200 pages of character development and setup, and I can tell this author is a fan. Some of the things she mentioned about Freddy in this last chapter were awesome, and I can't wait to see where it goes. So I'll be back tomorrow with some more. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s Slasher Librarian saying, thanks for listening, and let's go.